Our third speaker is Justin Brown, who's the First Assistant Secretary of the Office of Trade Negotiation, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So I guess Justin is very much more focused on the trade negotiations and improving Australia's access. He's had a lot of experience internationally in Canada, in Los Angeles, in Brussels and Copenhagen, and also time here in Canberra in various different roles. So please welcome Justin Brown.
Thanks, Mick. Good morning, everybody. So yes, my focus will be very much on the trade policy part of the story, and by that I mean the government level negotiations to improve our competitive position in global markets, especially in relation to market access. So just to start at the beginning, obviously we're one of the most significant global agricultural trading nations in the world. We're still ranked in the top 10. High proportion of our farm output is exported. We're particularly major players in world markets in fibre, grains and meat. We account for about 2/3 of global wool exports, about 1/5 of global beef exports, and more than 10% of global cotton and wheat exports. Our top export destinations are China, Japan and the United States. Of course, historically, global agricultural markets have been characterised by very high levels of government intervention, and that's had the result of limiting access in many important respects, but also in distorting markets in a number of ways. So that's a big focus of the trade policy effort, is on addressing those two challenges, market access and trade distorting measures. So I think Tobin mentioned some of the basic dimensions of the trade policy universe. We'll start with the multilateral. I think it stands to reason that multilateralism is the best case scenario for us. We've got global trading interests as a nation. The greater the multilateral outcome, the bigger the benefits for Australia in terms of better access to markets and a more level playing field, reduced trade distortions across the board. It took many years for the multilateral trade rules system to fully integrate agriculture into its set of rules, and that really only happened during the Uruguay round of the GATT, which was the negotiating round that led to the creation of the World Trade Organization, and the WTO agreement on agriculture was the outcome from those negotiations. And you'll see there that some of the key features of that agreement include tariffication, in other words, the conversion of many kinds of trade barriers, non-trade barriers, non-tariff barriers into a tariff equivalent. It also set tariff bindings, tariff guarantee levels, and basic minimum market access commitments were also enshrined in that outcome. There are also disciplines on types of trade distorting subsidies, particularly on export subsidies, which have been, up to that point, were a major feature of the, a major reason in a way for many of the distortions in world agricultural trade. You all know as well as I do that this agreement was very much a beginning. It was the first step along a very long path, and there's much unfinished business at the multilateral level. To give you a sense of the scale of the challenge, so bound agricultural tariffs at the global level are still much higher than non-agricultural tariffs, when we still have very high peaks in many countries for agricultural products, in some countries even as high as 1,000%, believe it or not. The US and the European Union still have plenty of scope within their Uruguay round commitments to spend a significant amount on trade distorting supports. And China as well has the capacity, quite legally, to spend the equivalent of 8.5% of the total value of its agricultural production on trade distorting subsidies. Something like $450 billion US by 2020 that amounts to. The EU still has the capacity to spend on export subsidies, and countries like India and some of the emerging nations also have entitlements to subsidise agriculture. So it's a very challenging environment, and the multilateral system is now more important than ever in tackling those challenges. Ironically, it's in a greater state of disrepair than it's ever been in many respects. You would have all heard about the Doha round. It was really intended to follow on from the Uruguay round in tackling some of those challenges. It was a very, very ambitious mandate. It really looks towards an outcome that provides for a substantial liberalisation of international trade in agriculture and to tackle some of those protectionist pressures, and building on the Uruguay round. Key feature of the Doha round was the interplay between the interests of developed and developing countries. So the Doha round has been named the Doha Development Agenda formally, and a big feature of the mandate is addressing the views and concerns of developing countries. Let me just deal a little bit with the FTA agenda. You'll see that in recent times we've made significant advances in concluding a range of free trade agreements. You'll see from this slide the number that are in force. The reason the government has gone down the path of FTAs is obvious. One, we have concluded that the scope for making progress at the multilateral level is now far reduced. And secondly, the government's made a number of reform initiatives and decisions which have set up Australia to make significant progress in terms of the commitments we make in free trade agreements. Excuse me. Important point to make about free trade agreements, whether they be bilateral, regional or plurilateral, is that their key feature is to improve access to markets. The one area where they cannot deliver outcomes, where the multilateral system is so important, is in disciplining spending and budgetary support for agriculture. So you'll see that in recent times we've had a very busy negotiating agenda, and a number of FTAs have been concluded. China is pending signature, and those under negotiation include the TPP, which I'll talk about a little bit in a moment, RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is a negotiation involving many countries in the Asia Pacific. We're also negotiating bilaterally with India, the Gulf Cooperation Council, Indonesia and PESA, which is a negotiation involving the South Pacific countries. The two others down there are less interest to the agricultural sector. The first is the Trade in Services Agreement, which is a plurilateral outside the WTO system. And finally, the Environmental Goods Agreement, which is currently under negotiation in Geneva. Much of the focus in recent times has been on our success in concluding 3 free trade agreements with the North Asian economies, China, Japan and the Republic of Korea. These 3 countries account for about 80% of Asia's total GDP, with a customer base of 1.5 billion people. The concluded agreements, you'll see there, the entry into force are all quite soon. They've all been clustered together, and we believe they provide a very strong basis for improving the commercial opportunities for Australian agricultural exporters. So for Korea, for example, we believe that on entry into force, most of the tariffs, agricultural and non-agricultural, will be phased out quite quickly. So 99.8% of Australian goods exports will enter Korea duty-free at the full implementation of the agreement. And in relation to Japan, more than 97% of our exports to that country will receive preferential or duty-free access when the agreement is implemented. And in the case of China, Over 85% of our exports to China will enter duty-free upon entry into force, and that'll rise to 93% after 4 years and 95% when the agreement is fully implemented. This chart gives you a sense of some of the agricultural specific outcomes from the 3 agreements. So you'll see for dairy that in the Korea agreement, Korea has given us very large duty-free quotas, for example, for cheese, infant formula and butter, and a phased tariff elimination for ice cream and yoghurt. In the Japan agreement, the most liberalising deal that Japan has ever done on agriculture, we have additional duty-free quotas for cheese, preferential access for ice cream, and tariff elimination for manufactured milk products. For China, the dairy industry will benefit from the phased removal of tariffs up to 20% on all dairy products, including elimination of tariffs on liquid milk, cream, cheese, butter, and yoghurt within 9 years. You'll see too, under, I think wine is listed here, that Korea has eliminated its 15% tariff on Australian wine on entry into force of the agreement, and Japan eliminated its 45 yen per litre tariff on bulk wine within 4 years from entry into force. In relation to horticulture, tariffs ranging from 8 to 24% on a range of horticultural products can now enter Korea duty-free, and Japan's giving our industries very quick tariff elimination on the vast majority of our horticultural export interests. And Chinese horticultural tariffs will be eliminated within 4 to 8 years, which historically is extremely quick. This is very significant given the starting point. China had some of the highest horticultural tariffs in the world. For beef, the Koreans are progressively eliminating their 40% tariff on beef and 80% tariff on bovine offal, and the full effect of those cuts will be phased in. And Japan, which is our second largest agricultural market, traditionally one of our largest markets for beef, and we're also seeing their tariffs on fresh and chilled beef and frozen beef, which are now 31% and 28%, will both be phased down. In China, the demand for beef is growing very rapidly, driven by some of the factors that Graham talked about earlier. So some of the outcomes there in terms of tariff elimination are quite significant and do provide us with real new market access opportunities. I mentioned earlier that one of the regional free trade agreement negotiations that's currently underway is for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There's now a very real prospect that this negotiation will be concluded in the coming months. This is an incredibly ambitious undertaking, this negotiation, but the successful conclusion of it does hold out the potential for very significant benefits for Australian agriculture. It would provide new levels of market access in all of the TPP markets. For a number of those markets, we already have FTAs, but for a number, we don't, including Canada and Mexico, for example. It had also put in place a number of new rules for improving the overall trade and investment environment within the 12 countries involved. Importantly, the TPP would also provide for other countries to join the TPP agreement over time, subject to the consensus of the existing members. There's been a lot of modelling work done on the potential benefits of a TPP deal. Needless to say, the numbers are quite big. One estimate is that by 2025, the TPP could add $2.5 billion extra in the annual value of our agricultural exports, increase of about 19%. So when you add these gains, potential gains from the TPP, to those gains that are in the pipeline in those 3 North Asian FTAs I've talked about, we think that there's significant potential and significant grounds for optimism about how the export future of the agricultural sector is now positioned. With the cooperation of Austrade, the DFAT is also currently embarking on a campaign to improve the understanding of the free trade agreements, particularly the North Asian free trade agreements. And we're developing a portal, an online portal that will provide information on the key outcomes from the North Asian FTAs, including a tariff finder. Hope that'll be a useful mechanism to assist the exporting community to make informed decisions based on the new opportunities in these agreements. So I think in conclusion, we believe that these recent developments on the trade negotiations front have given us a very good basis for improving the competitive position of Australian agriculture internationally. And our goal of expanding access for agricultural exports and promoting investment in the sector is steadily being achieved. Thank you very much.